stop motion still people, audience, and filmmakers still today appreciate the stop motion. What's in your opinion makes so special and timeless technique?
What in your opinion?
Well, I think that the fact that it's handcrafted and that imprint is very evident as opposed to computer graphics, which by the nature of what it is lacks that feeling.
Pues yo creo que
En ese sentido, in this sense, I would like to know how did start your fascination for special effects, for animation, for monster, for stop motion. How did it start?
In 1956, I was 5 years old, and it just happened to be somebody was watching. We were over at a neighbor's house, and they had the 1933 production of King Kong on, and I had no idea what I was looking at. That started my interest in dinosaurs, and so from that moment on, I almost became like an amateur paleontologist. On the weekends, I'm very objective-oriented. And so once I focus on something, I stay on it. And I would get my social life is very minimal, and I put as much time as I can into doing what I'm interested in doing. So I would have my parents drop me off at the library when I was young, and I would just go through all the dinosaur books they had in the notes. In 1958, I was 7 years old, and Ray Harryhausen's The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad was theatrically distributed, and so there was like a bolt of light. And once I saw that kind of set the course for the rest of my life. And I was fascinated by the process of stop motion. I had no idea what it was, but from between King Kong and that, I was fascinated with the spectacle of production, and I was always, kind of driven from that to see things that I'd never seen before.
Thank you for coming, and thank you for all your job. Jo volia fer una pregunta una mica seguint amb la línia de les declaracions que han fet directors com Christopher Nolan, sobretot Martin Scorsese, polèmiques en algun cas sobre o arran del cinema que es fa avui en dia d'entreteniment amb efectes especials. Què pensa el senyor Tippett sobre l'actual moment que travessa, no només si el cinema d'efectes especials és un 80-90% basat en superherois, sinó si a ell li agrada veure aquest tipus de cinema o se sent més còmode veient un cinema més artesanal, més senzill i no tan, entre cometes, buit. Que consti que jo estic bastant d'acord amb el que diu el senyor Scorsese.
Comences fort.
My question is regarding what some directors, contemporary directors like Christopher Nolan, Martin Scorsese are saying about cinema nowadays, which is this entertainment with these special effects, and 80-90% are superheroes basically. And the question is, what do you think about it? Do you like it, or do you prefer other movies with more handcrafted visual effects?
Well, I'm appalled by all that stuff. It's like, I can't watch it, it's just, I just can't watch it. I would look at the first few of them. There was a point after Starship Troopers where things really started to go in the shitter. And to me, it was if I dared to watch it to the end, which I rarely made. It was like drinking from the fire hose. You know, it was just like enough already. You know, and so you know, after the first one or two, I just avoid those movies altogether. You know, but it does. I would agree with those filmmakers in that it did kind of herald the collapse of more. Well, and I don't know if this is true, artistic cinema, because anything artistic is very rare anyhow.
Thomas, I wanted to ask you if you think that artificial intelligence is going to suppose such a big change in cinema as, for instance, the change from practical to digital effects in Jurassic Park.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm actually very excited about it. I mean, artists will generally gravitate immediately to whatever the new technology is because you don't know exactly what you can do with it, you know, and I would liken it to, you know, like being handed a brand new Stradivarius back in the day, and then, you know, as a violinist or a musician, you just want to get your hands on it and see what you can do.
Absolutely.
To embrace the change of technology, however difficult that might be. The change from stop motion to digital was very emotionally difficult for me at the time, but then I realized rather soon that you can do things digitally that you could never do in stop motion, so that's like a whole new avenue to explore. I'm technologically an imbecile, and I really am like dyslexic and like whatever. And but what the digital revolution afforded me was there was no way that I could work on a computer. You know, I can barely operate Word, and but what it did, you know, was kick me upstairs because all of they weren't even digital artists at the time. They were, you know, it was all so new. There were very few. I can't think of any skilled practitioners at the time. So, you know, it put me in a position because I knew, you know, pre-production, production, and post-production. And then when the big change came with Jurassic Park, I wrote a shitload about dinosaurs too. So that put me in this position then of, you know, supervising as opposed to primarily being a stop motion animator.
Speaking about directors, you mentioned in several interviews that Oltre was a kind of formative experience for you. I mean, it's kind of a very close spirit, as you say. Are you still thinking that it was a turning point in your career or in your meeting Oltre?
I had been a big admirer of Paul's work, you know, previously, so I was very excited to work with Paul. Paul is a very intense guy, and a lot of the time he's too intense for a lot of people. And but I always got along with him, you know. I mean, there are very few, we think, interchanges with Paul where on the set of Starship Troopers, sometimes he would get mad at me. Paul generally did around 9 takes. The eye line wasn't right, the action wasn't right. I would insist on more takes. And one time he got pissed off because I think maybe he did 12 or 15 takes. And he said, Phil, you're really pissing me off. He was pissed off. And I said, Paul, you have two choices. One, you can be pissed off with me now, or you can be pissed off with me in 6 months when I can't get the shot together. I always thought of my relationship with the director as more of a choreographer. And depending upon my involvement in a production, both Spielberg and Verhoeven considered me like a co-director. So I really had a great deal of influence over the entire production. For instance, on Jurassic Park, I knew a shitload about dinosaurs. And so what Crichton had articulated in his novel were things like the Tyrannosaurus picks up the Jeep and shakes it like, Godzilla. And it was like, no, you can't do that. And he had the first dinosaur you see was the Brontosaurus and the Patasaurus. And I brought in some books and said, no, there's a much better dinosaur. It looks much more interesting. It's like a brachiosaur, which has a really cool configuration. And Crichton had duck-billed dinosaurs for the stampede scene. And I said, no, we don't want to do that. They'll look like ducks. When there's this other dinosaur, the Scalamimus, which is an ostrich dinosaur, and the duck-bills would just waddle and couldn't get up between like 15 or 20 miles an hour, but these things could go like 50 or 60 miles an hour. So it'll be a lot more interesting. We're shooting in Hawaii, there's all these green hills, so we should make them orange-ish so they can pop out. So things like that, like a little bit of art direction, a little bit of choosing what would be the best character for the scene.
And that I was lucky to see it in Sitges here 2 years ago. I was a couple of times at the French Festival of Paris. It's a really incredible work. And I was kind of wondering how much did it change throughout the decades, the storyline? When you first started, you teach a storyboard, it's quite extensively. And another question is, I've read that you're already prepping another project with a very difficult name. And I was wondering how far is that progressing? Thank you.
You want to translate that?
The first question is about the first time that he was here in Sitges some years ago, and how his work has changed in those years. Sorry.
No, how much your background has changed throughout the years from the original start? Did it extensive storyboard in the beginning?
Mad God started with about a 12-page outline that was more like a tone feeling for it, but everything was pretty much there. And I shot, after RoboCop 2, I shot about 6 minutes of footage because I had the crew left over, and then they were dispersed. And the scope and scale of Mad God was too big. So, for some strange and mysterious reason that I just stick with things, it's like I'm cursed. And I just get on things like ugly on a hate, and I'm very objective and goal-oriented. And so it's like I get haunted or possessed by something. And so in the intervening 20 years, I do storyboards and character designs, hundreds of storyboards. And would work on scene, and this is like over 20 years, and then go away and work on some other stuff. And this is primarily on the weekends, in the evenings, when I was on location and had days off. And so the best answer I can give your question about the formulation of this was my wife was in the editorial department on Amadeus, and we would go out to dinner with Milos Forman, and at that point in time I was in my mid-20s, young filmmaker asking the maestro for advice, and he gave me the best advice I ever got, which was if you want to take a good shit, you have to eat well. And it was like a word from God. And it was like, of course, the more time you have to digest and invest in anything, you're building up a community of neurosynapses that it's like iron particles that are being gravitated towards a magnet in the center. It's like a sphere. And very slowly over time, they begin to coalesce. And it's almost like, what is it? Is it a photon? That can exist in different places. Nothing is ever really done until it's. Most artists that I know are generally never done unless there's a commitment to showing it. And in the instance of Mad God, it had to be taken away from me. And the sound designer Richard Bates, because we would still be working on it right now. But Shutter had to be screened there. So at that point, there were producers. There were no producers on the show except for me, so I could do whatever I wanted to do. And then at the end, I had to be ready then. But that's the first part. Part one. So after this 20-year period, one of the things that happened during that 20-year period, when I was drawing so much in so many storyboards over so many years, I would use different weights of paper, different pencils, different formats. And what I found out was, I might work on a section and not go back to that. And when I assembled, all of the storyboards, it looked like a different draftsman drew it in different periods because, there was such a lag between, say, working on a scene that there was so much time that my hand and eye coordination had to accommodate a different way of paper, a different pencil. And I would just pick up whatever was there and just draw things out. So about 12 years ago, I was archiving the 6 minutes that I had. And some of the guys at my studio were digital artists, but they had grown up seeing the making of Star Wars and RoboCop, and that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to work with models and miniatures and stop motion animation, but no one was doing that anymore. And so they offered to volunteer, and they saw me archiving, and they go like, "What the fuck is that?" And it was like, they thought it was some lost Carl Zeman movie from like the 40s or something. And so I explained to her what it was, and then one thing led to the next. They offered to do a shot. I still have the assassin character, the main character, left over 20 years. And so they shot that. That led to another shot, led to another shot. Some other people were interested. So I would give talks in the San Francisco Bay Area, and college students and high school students would volunteer. So I could get as many as 15 or 20 people on say, Saturday. And during the week, I would figure out processes. First you do this, then you do that. And I wouldn't have been able to have completed the film unless they were there to do some heavy lifting, the heavy lifting. And yeah, one of the sets was like, you know, these mountains of dead soldiers, and it took between 3 and 6 people working 1 day a week, probably for about 6 hours, 3 years to finish that model because there were so many different parts. So I just took the time that I needed to get to what I had in mind. And I forgot. So when Mad God got rebooted, I've been friends with the writer director Alex Cox for many years, who appeared in Mad God, and my company did some work on some of his, you know, lower budget projects, and that's where I met Dan Wohl, the composer, and Richard Beggs, the sound designer, which was like, you have no idea how fucking lucky that is. And yeah, I don't know if you're aware of Richard, but he goes back to Apocalypse Now and Harry Potter and blah blah blah, Academy Award winner. And Dan Wohl had done scores for Alex. And most of those, the movies that Alex was working on, were westerns, and Dan composed more of you know, Morricone type scores, but he was the only composer. I mean, I had a guy, one of the bassists for the Dead Kennedys, tried to do some music, and it was like just the wrong kind of music. It was too right on the nose. And so one of the things that I didn't want to do with Mad God was what generally you have to do when you're working on a production schedule, is when you're doing the editorial assembly of everything you've shot, you have a temp score. And in film, rhythmically, it tends to be cut to that score for presentation purposes. You know, so you can see it and feel it, and the executives can do the same. But I didn't want to do that. What I wanted my relationship with Dan to be for the score was symbiotic. And so I had no idea what his depth and breadth was. So I was showing I would do these kind of collages with a high-8 camera that were kind of all over the map, you know, with things that, you know, I would find around the house, or the kids were arguing in the back room, or I would use my score was AM radio. I would turn the dial back and forth. So it was very abstract collage, and I showed that to Dan, and that's where we immediately clicked, because I didn't know, you know, I thought he could write Italian Western music. But, you know, he was very invested with ambient music. And so the first thing that Dan came up with, he applied to the 6 minutes that I had previously shot years earlier. And it was he said, you know, oh, here's like a temp. This is something, you know, you probably won't like it. And I loved it. I just said, no, that's terrific. You know, keep it. And my directorial style is like very hands-off. You know, I have had too much unfortunate experience micromanaging people, and I hate to do that. And, you know, what I'm always looking for are, you know, skilled and talented people. And, you know, I usually don't say much. You know, it's like it starts here, it ends here, this is what it has to feel like, and let it go. You know, like most decent directors that I know, they don't get into these specific details of it. But, you know, it's just I found even on a managerial level, you know, the more you can get an artist to invest in the work that they're doing, the more you get out of it. And, you know, my relationship, you know, to them is more like children playing, you know. It might be they're discussing a shot or a scene. It's like, well, the character comes over here and it jumps over a fence and then it, you know, runs off into the forest or something. And oh, there's a direction. You know, I'm talking about, say, like a digital artist. And so I'll see you tomorrow and, you know, have them do a blocking of the scene. Their interpretation of what I just told them, which is minimal. And they'd come back with something that was like, that's nothing like what I was imagining, which is great. You know, that's what I'm looking for, is I really want to see something from a different perspective. And that gives me the opportunity to go like, okay, that's really good. What if, and then that turns into like with the artist is like, yeah, but then we could, and what if we, and then you're like children playing with toys, you know, and you excite each other, and that brings life to the shot and to the scene. Mad God was complete. We started to put together some things for the extras, and Mad God editor Ken Rogerson found like the very first assembly when we started to reboot over 12 years ago, where we took the 6 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever it was that I had shot 20 years ago, and then interspersed that with storyboards that I'd done over that 20-year period, and cobbled together I'd kind of forgotten what I'd written, but I had this feeling, and created this 11-minute piece that was like, you know, when we saw it was like, holy shit, this is the movie, you know. It maybe had like, 50 or 60 storyboards and like 30 shots or whatever. It was all over the place. And then Dan, the part of this, the music that Dan had written thus far, the editor would take that and run parts backwards, chop it up, put together, and we build things out. And as the film developed, the music and the film informed each other. There's something else already. This would probably come in the form of embarrassment, but Dan, can you stand up? He hates this.
I hate this.
Yeah. Dan was composed music for Mad God, which was unexpected. I didn't know, what to expect, but it was in perfect sync. Dan works a great deal with counterpoint and against the image, and there's a great deal of the image that is kind of brutalist, and some of the score would be a lot more beautiful, that existed in contrast to actually what you were seeing, and then as Dan says, he was just being interviewed for something, and reminded me, I'm not aware of this, but having to do with my directorial style, he would say, well, here's this scene, what do you think I should do? I'd say, do something funny. And so I leave the cooking to the chefs. The other term, like a vision for me, it's my analogy with the magnet, and the iron is also like the inverse, thing was that it was kind of like the Big Bang, and then things shot out of it like that. So the vision was very, very consistent all the way along. I mean, it was literally a vision. You know, I didn't know how all of the parts were going to go to, but the analogy is very similar to the Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, in that the hero is like given a task and goes down a path that leads to a path, and then there's like a talking crow that says, you know, go look in the well, and there's like an oracle in the well, and blah blah blah, and at some point the hero dies and has to be reborn one way or the other, which was essentially what happened to me, in that as Mad God progressed, I self-diagnosed myself as bipolar, and I don't get depressed unless my dog gets run over, but I'm manic, and it's actually my superpower, and also that which destroys me, in that, like, once I start on something, it's very hard for me to stop. You know, I can work 8, 10, 12 hours straight on something. You know, I'm manic, like dinner, you know, anything. And by the end of the day, I'm just exhausted. I mean, I just like beat the shit out of myself. And I go home and all I can do is sit in front of the TV, but I can't turn my mind off. And so I self-medicated with alcohol, you know, for years. And essentially I disintegrated. And I didn't know this, you know, until friends, you know, later told me I looked like a homeless person. You know, my hair, my beard had been washed, my clothes were all torn and, you know, covered with grease and paint. I had sores all over my hands from banging things up. You know, I was like I was wretched. And, you know, I would tell people, you know, they ask me, how many God's going? I said, I hate that fucking thing. You know, I wish it was dead. I wish I didn't, you know. And so it just got to this manic point where I just at some point snapped and ended up having to go into the psych ward for a few days, and then in rehab for, you know, about 6 weeks, and gradually, right after, you know, my collapse, all I could do was sit in front of the TV, and my adrenaline was just going so fast that I would just stay up for 72 hours at a time just watching whatever was on television. And then, you know, I consulted a psychiatrist and got medication, so everything's fine now. I'm very medically.
You. Happy one.
I'm not finished. So, unbeknownst to me, the story that I just told you about, you know, my journey, I think it was in the 30s or the 40s, psychiatrist Carl Jung wrote this book called The Red Book, which is really interesting. You can find it in Passion, and it's really big. But it was his own version of the hero's journey. And it's a beautiful book where he had like a lot of, you know, kind of gold leaf, you know, not quite paintings, but like paintings and mandalas and all that kind of stuff. And he compiled this book with art and really beautiful, you know, Gothic German writing. He did this in secret for over the period of 16 years. And I only learned this around the time I was starting to go insane. Somebody said, "Oh, you should look at this." And Jung lost his mind during this period. And he was just all alone with this thing. And I guess his family realized what was going on, and we were able to help stitch it back together again. And I like to imagine that they sent him to a psychiatrist as a joke.
We are happy to have you here as a happy mind, and please big applause for